Hello, and welcome to What's the Tea with ACP, where we like to bring in our guests and talk with them live. We talk to featured artists and chat with them about what's going on in their lives, their art, and their social experiences. This is a very special episode today because we're partnering with Wear Yellow Proudly for National Coming Out Day. Let me give you a little bit of the tea of the day and talk to you a little bit about Wear Yellow Proudly. So the tea of the day is VisibiliTEA, and this special episode of What's the Tea will be focusing on the intersectionality of what it is being queer, Asian, and an artist. We'll discuss how this affects one's visibility and perspective within one specific space. This episode will feature Sam Lim, Matthew Ozawa, Ting Ting Wong, and is a unique episode as we're in conjunction with Wear Yellow Proudly, whose mission is to bring awareness to Asian culture and strengthen the ties within the global community during the COVID-19 pandemic. Wear Yellow Proudly is an Aural Compass Project initiative. So I want to start introducing our guest for today. Our first guest is Ting Ting Wong. Hello, Ting Ting.
Hi, everyone.
Nice to see you. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of background about Ting Ting and give you her bio a little bit. So collaborative pianist Ting Ting Wong is active as a vocal coach and accompanist in the Philadelphia area. This year, Ting Ting currently works as staff accompanist at the Academy of Vocal Arts and Curtis Institute of Music. She's also served as a chorus pianist with Opera Philadelphia, assistant conductor with Concert Opera Philadelphia, and pianist at Opera Theater Pittsburgh Summer Festival and Castleton Music Festival. Currently, Ms. Wong is the accompanist for the Mendelssohn Chorus of Philadelphia, the Jefferson University Singers, Chorus of Philadelphia, the Jefferson University Singers. She's the music director at Newton Square Presbyterian Church and music director for Union League Voices. Collaborating with fellow musicians remains Ting Ting's passion. She made her debut as a collaborative pianist at the Kennedy Center in 2016. Born and raised in Hong Kong, Ting Ting holds 2 master's degrees, one in piano performance from Carnegie Mellon University, where she also earned a piano pedagogy certificate, and one in piano accompanying and coaching from Temple University, where she studied with Dr. Lambert Orkis and Dr. Charles Abramovic. Is that right? Abramovic?
Yeah, Abramovich, but it's good.
Abramovich. Correct me, Ting Ting. If I'm wrong, let me know. So next we're going to have Matthew Ozawa. Bring him into the...
Hello, friends.
So nice to see you and chat with you today. So I'm going to give a little bit about Matthew now. Let me tell y'all, this bio is fierce. So hold on, get ready. All right, so Matthew is a stage director, artistic director, and educator whose international career spans all artistic disciplines. Ozawa is a master storyteller whose strikingly spare productions from the New York Times are a vivid demonstration of what opera is all about by Opera News. His productions consistently deliver brilliance on all fronts, that's true T, from the Chicago Tribune, and are filled with breathtaking imagery from Broadway World. Ozawa is the founder and artistic director of Mozawa, a Chicago-based incubator advancing collaborative art and artists. Also a proponent of arts education, Ozawa served 3 years as assistant professor of music at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Passionate about collaborative interdisciplinary performance, new work, and reigniting classics, Ozawa's stylish and intelligent productions have been seen at Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Houston Grand Opera, Santa Fe Opera, Opera Theater of St. Louis, Minnesota Opera, Cincinnati Opera, Wolf Trap Opera, Opera Colorado, Des Moines Metro Opera, Opera Siam, and Asian Society, among many others. I told y'all it's fierce. He's slated to direct a new production of Fidelio at San Francisco Opera. Committed to new and modern operatic work, recent new production highlights include Ro Huang's An American Soldier from Opera Theater of St. Louis, Perla and Murphy's An American Dream, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Hanlon and Fleischman's After the Storm, Houston Grand Opera. Now, listen, I looked up how to say this person's name. Now, help me out, Matthew. Is Sucharitkul. Sucharitkul. Now, I'm sorry, y'all know I mess up some names here, so correct me when I'm wrong. Snow Dragon and Opera Siam, and Reagan Fry's The Memory Stone with Houston Grand Opera. Ozawa was raised in California, followed by Singapore, and is a graduate of the United World College of Southeast Asia and Oberlin Conservatory. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks.
And last but not least, we have Sam Lim joining. Hello, Sam. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. So Sam is an award-winning educator and activist working at the intersection of LGBTQ+ advocacy, nonprofit leadership, and K-12 higher education. The former inaugural senior diversity officer for the Atlanta Pride Committee Incorporated Board of Directors. They currently serve as a graduate retention fellow with the Leadership, Engagement, and Advocacy and Diversity Lead Office at Salem State University, pursuing a master's in education and higher education in student affairs. Active in the community, Sam is a member of the City of Salem Mayor's Cultural Council, No Place for Hate Committee, and Sigma Alpha Epsilon's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. They hold a BA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and are a proud alumnus for Teach for America Metro Atlanta 2018 and member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
So, we at What's the Tea, we like to keep everything kind of, easy and breezy, okay? We just like to have conversations just like if we were sitting in a living room. So I want to start off by giving you the definition of what visibility is and why we decided to go with visibility as our tea of the day. Also, at the bottom of the screen, it's going to tell you a little bit about where we got the word tea from. I know we always put that at the beginning of the show, but we never really talk about why it's there, but get into it. That's the tea. All right, so the definition of visibility. It's the state of being able to see or be seen, the degree to which something has attracted general attention or prominence. So we chose this because I feel like, and some of the members of Wear Yellow Proudly feel like sometimes the visibility of Asian LGBTQIA+ members are not necessarily shown as vividly as some other member categories, as other BIPOC member categories, and especially in our white counterparts categories. And we wanted to make sure that there was a space for people to be visible and to talk about the things that matter to them, whether that be a queer space, artistic space, or Asian cultural or heritage space. So that's why we chose visibility. I hope you like the choice. But I'm wondering, how has it been for you all as artists or as queer people or as Asian people? How have you been affected by like COVID-19 and the pandemic? Just a brief kind of overview about how you're doing. Whoever wants to start can start. Okay, I'm gonna pick somebody since y'all don't want to pick anybody. We're gonna start with Sam, Because I see you over there giggling.
I had a feeling you were gonna pick me. I think for me, it's been sort of multifaceted in that area of like, how am I being impacted?
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently in graduate studies in addition to working in the different things that I do. So it's been difficult on that end of having to be virtual. I think that's difficult for everybody. But mostly in my role in supporting students, I think that's been the biggest struggle that I've seen is how do we reach students authentically and effectively? I think about my K-12 students where at the school I taught, a third of my students were homeless essentially. And we had to figure out how we could connect with them during COVID-19. We had to partner with tech companies, go out into the community and find the students. So that was a big ordeal. Now that I'm working with college students, a lot of them are getting quote unquote zoomed out. They're tired of the Zoom between the many classes they have to take. And in my role in supporting co-curricular and extracurricular activities for them, specifically in multicultural support, we have to find ways that they want to engage with us with the level of energy that they have left after their classes.
Totally interesting. Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Matthew, come on. You already know.
Okay. I mean, I'm so glad that today is about visibility or VisibiliTEA. Because yes, I think in some respects that COVID or the pandemic has created a lot of erasure and actually taken away a lot of visibility that may have been seen in a certain light. Like, of course, there's visibility in the sense that, Asians are being blamed for COVID. So that is like not a visibility that we're necessarily excited by or feel that is an appropriate, demarcation or connection. But, the performing arts have been hit so hard. And so for the most part, there's been an erasure of all of our shows, of our livelihoods, and all artists creating work that's just been put on hold in live. Now there's stuff that's being created in a different kind of platform, a remote platform. But I would say that for me, I'm like one of the few Asian American opera directors. And oddly enough, I left University of Michigan to go back into freelance opera directing because I was about to move into maybe more visibility. So with the pandemic, it just felt kind of like the erasure of a lot of where I was going to head. And then that fight for survival of okay, what shows will come back? What companies will survive? How to create new visibility in what is now turning into an electronic kind of platform world. And that's kind of terrifying when, at least for me, my craft is so much devoted to live interactions and interpersonal relationships. I am directing a show at the University of Michigan, even though I left, about 150 years of Asian immigrant history as told through the lens of an immigrant drag queen. And it's called A Beautiful Country by Che Yu, and it originated at Cornerstone Theater Company. And we actually were in rehearsals in February and March when the pandemic shut the show down. Wow. And we, of course, were so disheartened at the time because it felt like all Asian, stories were being erased with the pandemic being, shutting us down. And the university, very, very strongly said, we want you to do this show in the fall, thinking we were going to be back in person. But we aren't back in person. And exactly what Sam was saying is trying to connect with students in this electronic field and world. And we actually have been spending the past month and a half rehearsing this show. And so now it's giving me a whole new kind of light as to what it means to create work, but so much of it is about community. And when everyone's so alone in their Zoom boxes, it's how do you create space for meaning for individuals to tell their stories and be themselves?
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I'm still excited for this project, honey. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I'll have to let you know. Yeah.
Please. Ting Ting, what about you? How's life been, in this COVID space and landscape for you?
I think it's echo to both of you, and it's been a challenge in a lot of ways. That's as a pianist, everything it has to be live. And the fact that we cannot do that, we have to kind of make something work, right? So a lot of my work, instead of being flexible, really collaborating with other artists, like other great artists that I work with, now I just have to stick with recording, so rigid of like, I have to make sure that I do like 5 seconds of break in between and such like that. And the singers will have to react with that 5 seconds. And, you know, that's a challenge that we are all learning. And, but at the same time though, it's great to still be able to engage with all of them in a different capacity. And I feel like it just also, as a director for a church, is also learning new skills, because how do I combine all the voices together and make it work? Because we cannot be at the same place at the same time, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, my computer doesn't work. I need to get a new computer, new program, new software. And just, you know, like at the beginning, it just, I would say it's rough. And not to mention at the very beginning, being, you know, Chinese, and I would go to a grocery store, walk along the aisle. There will be people just pull up their mask or just really walk away. And that happened. And one of my friends even have that issue of like, why you're not, like, she's on a bus with her child and she just like, you know, got yelled by other lady saying that, get off the bus right now, like that kind of thing. Then anyways, it's been challenging, but yeah, we're all hustler.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We're hustling, making it happen. And I mean, I knew that that's something that a lot of my Asian friends and colleagues have been experiencing. This xenophobia, this like fear of people that are not, that people think, right, on looking are not American or of American culture or whatever it may be. And it's disgusting, to be quite honest. So I mean, that's my opinion. And I think my opinion is right. So I want to actually talk about a little bit about what it was like for you all growing up, finding different parts of your identity, whether it be artistic or queer, or even connecting with your own like Asian heritage. And if you feel comfortable telling us just a little bit about that, and you know, yeah, just your own experience coming into yourself as an adult, or, you know, teenager into adulthood. So look, I'm gonna let y'all, somebody step in. Somebody's ready to talk. I can tell.
I can start if that's fine with everyone. Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Syracuse, New York. My dad is Chinese Malaysian. He came to this country, I believe in like the 70s or 80s. My mom is a white woman, Jewish woman, grew up in Ithaca, New York. So I grew up in a very multicultural household. My dad practices Taoism. My mom and my sister practice Judaism. We went to a Catholic school. Like, there were a lot of just cultures at play. And I think it was really a process of understanding, where do I fit in with all this, right? Like, what bits and pieces really are salient for me? I think the biggest thing, which most Asian people will say, the food is the biggest sort of part of my identity and culture, in addition to my religion. But unfortunately, like, growing up, you know, I felt safe at home, really leaning into the culture and enjoying it and letting it be a part of me. But when I would leave my home, especially when I went to a Catholic high school, I would get so many just nasty comments. I remember somebody told me, you know, I'm going to hell because I practice Chinese religion. I would try to bring traditional Chinese foods to school. All my friends would be like, gross, you know, and I was just tired of hearing that. And then I went out into adulthood. I went to college, you know, did 1 year at the Cleveland Institute of Music, spent 3 more years in UMKC's conservatory. And I had the great pleasure of studying with Vincent Cole for voice, which was a huge honor. You know, I miss him dearly. Haven't seen him in a couple of years, and I think part of the issue was I wasn't really seeing my culture represented in those spaces. You know, Matthew talks about going out of Michigan to become, you know, more visible in the opera field. But part of why I felt so alone was also I didn't ever meet an Asian voice professor or an opera professor. You know, I studied opera with David Bamberger, Fenlon Lamb, two extraordinary opera minds who played a huge role in my development. But I was very tired in the field of never seeing somebody who looked like me. And that's partly, not 100%, but partly why I left music as a performer. And I've had the pleasure to, you know, continue working in more of an administrative and educational role in supporting artists. My goal is to help create a more inclusive higher education landscape for performing artists to train in their craft. But as I got older, you know, I realized I wanted to lean into my queer identities as more or as much as I could. I came out as bisexual in college. Unfortunately, my fraternity brothers weren't so happy about that at the time. But after I graduated, a lot of them came back to me and said, you know, I'm sorry the way that I treated you, but the damage had already been done in some aspects.
Right. Yeah.
But now I share that story with folks to say that you're not alone in you know, you're not going to be the first fraternity person to come out, and you're not going to be the last, right? Mm-hmm. And I've met so many more in that process. I think it's harder though when universities and colleges are not really appreciative of Asian culture, I would say. I mean, at least in my experiences. And again, helping students find ways to embrace who they are, whether it be through their religious expression, through their fashion culture and other works. I think the nicest thing for me in graduate school now is I have a professor who, although he's not Chinese, is Desi American. And that's been very special, sharing just another Asian voice to at least hear some of the things that I'm saying and sharing some of those experiences. I came out as non-binary while I was in Atlanta teaching. That did not go so well. I think the conservative landscape of the South was just very toxic to me. I also worked in a very toxic school, if you ask me, that was not LGBTQ friendly across the board. I'd also go as far to say they weren't necessarily Asian friendly either. So it took a while for me to open up and say, hey, I need to get out of this space. And now that I'm working in Massachusetts on although there's work to be done, a much more inclusive campus, and I get to support other Asian students as well and LGBTQ students, I feel more empowered to live authentically. But that definitely was a process. So.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it seems sometimes down here, I'm in Virginia, so sometimes down here we can, you know, down the street from me, you know, right up the block, there's the Trump flags hanging out, chilling. So, you know, it's shifting slightly, thankfully, I think all over, hopefully. However, there's still so much that needs to change. What about you, Ting Ting?
Or it's my turn.
Yeah, it's your turn. You want to go?
I don't know where to start. So I grew up in Hong Kong, and my parents are kind of like the cool P, but it's still with the Chinese culture, and we growing up supposed to be, you know, like girly and things like that. And I always have short hair, and I think around maybe like 11 or 12 years old, I really know that I'm a lesbian. So the thing is, we just don't talk about things in Asian culture, in family. And so it's never been addressed. And I think when I was around 16, then my father actually kind of found out, and the whole household was just shit for a couple months. Is my dad would not talk to me because he thought he did something wrong, that I'm wrong. Like I something is wrong with me. I had to stop seeing girls. Like this is just not right. I was grounded for a long time, even though I was 17 years old. And, but then it just kind of thing, just, I don't know, like I was grounded. And when I got to college and the relationship slowly improved, and my mom finally, you know, at one point just said, you know, we know it is what it is. You just have to be what you are. And we would accept that the fact that you're a lesbian. But then like for all these years, you have problems. Now, like I'm married for 5 years, and when I go back to visit, my wife would still be my friend. even though most of my relatives, they either know or they kind of guess it, but they don't talk about it. But for me, like, it's kind of like a fine line that I want to respect what they want to do, which is not talk about it. But at the same time, I feel like I'm hiding something from them. And I also think that it's not fair for my wife either, because we are obviously a family, and so that, like, my parents love her very much, but just like they just cannot get over the fact that they have to face how they were being judged by our relatives. And anyways, so I don't know, kind of like sparse. And when I moved here for grad school, it was actually kind of nice in a way, because I feel like, oh, now I'm in America, I can be myself, right? And being in Carnegie Mellon is actually a very accepting atmosphere. But then I kind of lost my identity. Like, who am I? Am I really a lesbian and things like that? There are like different faces. I kind of try different ways, and I just couldn't find myself. Try to wear all this. I don't know. Like, there's a time that I would just go to men's session to get a thing because I wanted to be a lesbian, right? But it took me like basically kind of the whole 2 years there, and I realized that the only way for me to feel comfortable is really to be myself. And I don't know, like, I mean, still try to like get the balance of it, right? And to this day, there will be some like back in my mind is like, am I being judged or anything like that? But again, like, I have to get over that. And like Sam, like when I was at college, I also have some friends that just basically tell me that, like, you're going to hell. Like, it's not wrong. The fact, like, it's just wrong that the fact that you like girls and you have to change that. But that just kind of like, that's where the friendship just kind of unfortunately has to end, because I can't be if I cannot be myself within my group of friends, it's just no way for me to be still in that community. Anyways, so because of that, there's also I was able to find like really a group of friends so supportive, and like to this day I'm like 1,000 miles away, and then we still talk all the time. Anyways, just pretty much it.
No, thank you for sharing that, because I mean, I think we're starting to see that that's kind of a thread that's happening. And I love where you touched on how even when you were here in America, still having to try to feeling like, okay, now I can like be myself, but still having to try to find your identity within your own mental and like queer space, like American queer space. I love that you touched on that. What about you, Matthew?
Yeah, I wanna like raise up what Sam and Ting Ting are saying as well, because I think that it is complicated talking about the intersectionality of identity within the US, where we are taught to assimilate, or like, what is assimilation? How are you accepted? When are you accepted as being an American? So it's like we are, I think that at least I always have viewed, I'm like, I feel like I'm a multiple minority because, being queer, being, Asian, and being an artist, right? Like being an artist is not something that people really love or accept all the time. It's certainly not something that's completely appreciated in our, American society, and in Asian culture. It's like, oh, no, be a lawyer or a doctor. don't be a freelance artist. I would say that for myself, I'm 4th generation Japanese American. So I was raised in the US. Like Sam, I'm half. So my dad is Japanese, but my mom is Caucasian. My Asian family all passed away before I was born. So I was really kind of surrounded by my Caucasian family for a large part of my upbringing. And my father was actually born in an internment camp at the end of World War II. So that aspect of the Japanese side of our family was never talked about. And then randomly, and I knew I was gay like really young, but it was always like really hidden. And then we moved to Singapore, and my parents always were actually very supportive of me being an artist. But then we moved to Singapore, where it is like, being gay is illegal. It is very, you know, rule bound, structure bound. So while I think I became more repressed in terms of my, you know, sexual identity, my Asian identity became more formed once I was in Singapore, because I suddenly was no longer the minority. I was like the majority because I was surrounded by other Asians. And I started to learn Japanese. I went to Japan multiple times and traveled around Asia and realized that I'm Asian, right? Like, I mean, I love Asian culture and Asian food and the arts and all these different aspects that really were brought out of my identity. And then I went to a British high school. So I ended up like leaving Singapore with a British accent. I was like repressed in terms of being gay. I was Asian. I thought I was going to go to school in London. And my parents were like, no, you need to come back to the US, even though they stayed in Asia. So I came back to the US. I went to Oberlin, which is like the most like liberal place on the planet.
That's what I've heard, honey.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they were like, you're gay until proven straight. I mean, it was just like everyone is, you know, it's like no one, there are no boundaries. So it was really like shocking coming from Singapore. It was like, no, if you chew gum, you're going to get caned. You know, it was like, okay. Oh. And then suddenly I'm in Oberlin, but oddly enough, they lost my housing application. So guess where they housed me? They put me in Asia House. And so it was a weird sort of environment where it was like, okay, like, why am I being put in Asia House? And no one thought that I was an American because I now had a British accent. So they were like, you're international, you're not an American. And it took me many years to like unpack all the confusion, because then of course at Oberlin, I came out. Mm-hmm. So then it was like, what aspect of my identity was being repressed? Then I came out. And of course, like I think everyone's saying, the family dynamic is always really complicated. There have been times where it's like not accepted to be gay, or being, you know, an artist has been like difficult in terms of like, are you going to make money? Do you have a full, you know, pathway? Are you going to be safe in that environment? And yeah, I mean, it's been like a very rocky road. And I will, you know, completely say, hey, Sam, man, I do not see myself in opera as an Asian. Right? Like I've spent now, what, 16, 17 years in the industry. And the big running joke, which really wasn't quite a joke for me, but the joke at Lyric Opera Chicago was that for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I was the only Asian in the building except for the person who delivered the mail.
Wow.
And so, of course, when you're then intersecting with pieces like Butterfly or Turandot or Pearl Fishers, or any of these pieces where people are, you know, backstage in orange face or yellow face, or they are mocking Asian culture, and, you know, and it really kind of hurt, but I don't think I realized it hurt because I was trying to assimilate into the world of opera. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think I realized how much damage it had done until I tried to leave opera. And at that point, then my like queer identity was like fully present. But then I realized that even in the gay, you know, scene, I was not accepted because I was Asian. And that was like, it was like I was erased, you know, like that I would stand there, no one would talk to me. And, you know, it was really difficult to be in a space that I thought was going to feel safe, only to realize that actually there were huge hierarchies within the gay scene about, you know, at the top were white, next were black, next were Latino, and like Asians were, you know, at the bottom. And my disabled friend is like, well, actually the disabled are at the very bottom because they're like completely not even existent. And it, you know, like all of that, it has taken me a long time to like fully come to terms with identity, fully like be reborn, and then to just accept like I am what I am. People can either take it or leave it. And, you know, I'm also going to now start to speak up, because I think that in opera, I was so silent for so many years. And then it's like, you know what? I'm going to speak up and I'm going to say that this is not okay. We're going to have discussions about it. Like, I'm not trying to like break the system, but I'm trying to say, let's like bring a chair to the table. Because at the end of the day, like we want diverse audiences, right? Like we want, what stories are being told, what is being seen. And if we don't see ourselves on stage, and if those on stage don't see themselves backstage, like we have a major issue. So like that's currently, because of Black Lives Matter, all of that is now really coming to the fore. And the fact that companies now have the pandemic to sit there and like think about these things and what is going to happen once we come back from the pandemic. There's like a big shakeup. And then, of course, there's a huge shakeup in our country, you know, where immigrants and anyone of color is like being, you know, really kind of demonized and being pushed aside or being removed from the country, or, you know, families are being torn apart from each other. I mean, these aspects then make you worried about your identity in this country. You know, it's like, I'm American, but recently my passport expired and I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen with the elections? And am I, you know, and we switched states my partner and I switched states from Michigan to Illinois. And I was like, if I don't have an identity, you know, I still am a person of color and I'm gay. Am I going to be like shoved into a van, you know? And like, I mean, it was those sorts of very odd things to be thinking about, even though I feel like confident in my identity. Sorry, I was talking a lot.
No. Listen, this is why we're here, right? We're here to talk and to have open dialogue, because I'm sure there's so many people from this conversation that we're having alone will be able to take pieces and feel like they can connect, right? Because there's so many things that we all feel separately, and we don't always get to like express those things and realize that other people are feeling the exact same way, right? Also, Matthew, you have a question from the audience. What age did you live in Singapore? That's so interesting.
The most formative years. So I lived there from 8th grade through.
Feeling the exact same way. Right?
Hearing something?
It's okay.
From roughly like 13 through like 18. So all of high school.
So yeah, that's the time.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I want to get to the questions that were asked. And so I'm going to bring up the first one, because so much of the conversation already has been about like, well, obviously the conversation today is about the intersectionality of different parts of your humanness, right? But this question just perfectly meshes into that. So this one is, how have the intersections of your identity impacted your artistic process and output? So can I actually go first?
Yes. Spill some tea.
Because I do want this to be like a full conversation, right? Like, I don't want it to just be like, so tell me about all the things that you've experienced, because I absolutely hate that. So I am Black, queer, male, from the South, all of these different intersectional spaces. And so for me, growing up, I grew up in a mostly inner city school system. So, let's say high school. I went to 2 years where I am now in Virginia, in Newport News, Virginia, where the school was kind of like a more mixed space. Like it was like a bunch of different cultures, especially because this area is made up a lot of military families. So you get a lot of different people from different places. And then I went to school in Richmond, Virginia, and that school was considered an inner city school. And it was definitely a change of space and pace. Like the arts was not taken into consideration fully. And so I thankfully was able to join the Richmond Boys Choir, which I had been a part of before. And from there, like my identity, I think, kept blooming. Like I kind of found friends who were also let me post this little thing right here. RVA represent, hey. And so basically I found for other friends who also had this queer identity, and the Richmond Boys Choir was made up of mostly Black young men, right? And so I was able to find that space with my friends and be like, we are all experiencing the same things. And so that was so nice to have like a formidable place there, which was so, I went to Huguenot, Jesse. So to have a formidable place, right, in order to like kind of blast me off into college. But so I'm coming from a high school that's mostly Black. And then I go to James Madison University, which is a PWI, predominantly white institution, where the Black, out of 16,000 students, the Black percentage was 2%. So then I'm there and I'm like, wow, okay, I'm the only Black person in my class. This is very interesting. So then my identity started to kind of like shift in thinking like, well, I need to like assimilate, right? Like I need to drop some of the things, like I had an accent, like I was, I still think I have a little one now, but it's not as strong as it was. And like over the course of those 4 years, my identity shifted, right? Like I came back home and I was like, wow, this is it was just different. And then I moved to Manhattan and for school, and then it shifted again because I never, even though I went to a predominantly Black high school, I still never really was in touch with my own like Black heritage, like my own space of like Blackness, right? And so from MSM and I was able to do a job at Abyssinian Baptist Church, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Black Baptist church in New York City. I was able to form these bonds and form these friendship connections and, start to see more of my own culture, and like just so many different things started to happen. So through the time to now, the connection that I've garnered with my queer identity, my Black identity, my artistic identity has just been actually pretty amazing. I think that for a long time, I didn't think that I had a like voice to say what I wanted to say. Like I've always been outspoken, but there wasn't like a space for me to have a voice in my artistic identity. And I think actually through this pandemic, that's been where I found that voice of being like, this is not okay. These are the things that are not okay. These are my experiences, and this is how I think it should change. And I've done that previously, like on a not so vocal platform, but I think now I'm like, honestly, why not? Like, why not talk about these issues? So for me, sorry, I know I went around the block, honey, but we're coming back home. So for me, my identity has impacted my artistic process by thinking about what stories I want to tell and thinking about the way that I tell stories that have already been written. So when I'm doing, now thinking about like different productions where we're supposed to be playing other cultures and, just different aspects of different heritage spaces, being okay with going up to a director and saying, can we talk about this? Or going up to a costumer or a makeup artist and saying, can we just have a discussion about this? Because I don't know if this is actually appropriate. Now, if, that's just me personally, but I think now this has informed my own like ability to stand up and like say and speak out on things that aren't just affecting me, but are affecting other people within just the world in general. I mean, in a different culture. So that's how it's affected me. But please, please, if you like to speak on that question.
I'll quickly say, this is so interesting because I do think that like the intersection of identity really is like part of our art. However, by trying to be visible, sometimes we make decisions that are not our full identity in our artistry or output. So like, I know that for myself, I've been on a very lengthy road with Madame Butterfly.
Honey.
And, I will say that like now I'm in a totally new phase where I'm like, no more. Like there's going to be no more white people shuffling around in kimonos, like that kind of, you know, like I think I tried to really explore, you know, the lots of racial diversity on the stage in Butterfly, but it still didn't negate from the fact that I felt comfortable when everyone was like shuffling around or bowing or kneeling. It was like, and, you know, I tried to take all of that away as much as I could, but it still is like such a fabric of the tradition that I'm like, ultimately, this isn't totally representing like my identity or our new exploration of what is Butterfly in America 2020. It doesn't necessarily look the way that we've seen it looking for like decades and decades and decades. And that's okay. And I think that people will be very upset by it, right? But like, I think it's okay. But yeah, I think that is a bit interesting. You know, I keep thinking a lot about that with my identity and what sorts of stories am I telling? How am I telling them? And I know that for myself, like a lot of my directing style tends to be minimal. I tend to be like some of my Asianness kind of comes out in my directing style. But also like the intersection of my identity, I've been trying to like come out more in just general artistic output of like, I want the work that I'm doing to be multidisciplinary. I want it to be, you know, lots of different things. And I don't want to like box myself in, right? I think that that's such a thing in art, is to like box someone in, or in life, right? We're like, we see you, so we're going to put you in a little box. You look this way, so we're going to say that this is what you are, even if that's not what you feel you are. And so I think that it's important that with art, like, again, creating safe spaces so that if you're an audience member, you can sit there and you can watch it and feel like, oh, I maybe can be a part of this world. I maybe can see myself in that story. And that is like really, I think, a new aspect of what I feel my duty is as a director, is like not only to tell those stories, but also to really open the door for those that have been barred from access into opera. Right? To like really open that door. And that is not an easy or quick road, but it is one that I'm like, just like you, Elliot, it's like, okay, the pandemic has made me really be like, okay, I can speak to these things and I can make some kind of change, and, you know, just keep going, whether it's like mentorship or allyship or any number of things to allow people into opera, you know, or into the arts, and say like, this can be your world too. It's a beautiful world. Because otherwise, it's just always going to be the same thing.
Same old. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And Matthew, I really appreciate what you said about being boxed in, right? And I think when I was in my undergrad, you know, I'm a really big guy. I'm just bulky. I look very, people said I looked like intimidating or tough. And my voice was very dark and rich, and I was a bass baritone at that time. And the directors that I worked with and vocal coaches, they were always like, you got to sing really tough, masculine repertoire, and we're going to try to get you to go towards like Wagnerian and all this stuff. And I was like, look, I don't feel comfortable necessarily doing that. Like, I would love to be a well-known Wagnerian bass baritone, but in my body, like, I wasn't out as non-binary at that time, but I knew deep down I always felt awkward on stage because it didn't feel authentic to me. I felt like I was just pleasing how people saw me, right? And that created a conflict, I think, with, you know, I was reluctant to learn my repertoire and get the work done because I didn't feel comfortable on the stage. And I got a lot of comments like, oh, you move very awkwardly on stage. And I was like, yeah, because I don't want to move the way that you want me to move, or that you think I should move. And I remember getting this comment once. I was saying, is there any way I could do something more feminine, not as tough? And the woman I was working with said, that's going to confuse directors. They're not going to want you. You are this, so you need to sing to this repertoire. And I said, I can't do it anymore. Like, this isn't who I want to be and the work that I want to do. And it's a shame because so many people, you know, my voice changed when I was 12, and I was working with a bass from Germany at that age, taking lessons, and it was a great experience. And I felt like I threw my voice away in a lot of ways. I knew a lot of people were upset my coaches and teachers when I walked away from singing. But there was an emotional cost to doing how they wanted me to do opera. And I really also appreciate your comment of like, what does butterfly mean in America today? And I felt like so much of the training I received was, what did these white men think I should do based on what they practiced 200-300 years ago, right? So it just makes me think of like how influential the words of voice teachers and coaches are in that mindset. But also, like, is the industry ready to adapt to take on the new young singers who are training that are willing to push those gender and expressive boundaries?
I hope that they are. I hope that that is the hopefully the new space of, I mean, we have to. I mean, and within the operatic space, like we have, there's no way. I'm sorry. Like, I love me some Verdi, Puccini, like I love it all. But however, it's problematic, consistently problematic, because it's through the white gaze, right? Like, and the people who are singing it are not all within the white gaze. So we need to have stories. We need to figure out ways to take those visions and switch them on their heads, But Ting Ting, what about you? How do you feel like your identity has impacted your artistic process?
I think it's more of echoing how Matthew was saying, that get out of the box, because like how I was raised is, you just do what you're told, and that's the right thing to do, and you just enter the path. And I also had, like, I think I need to be more outspoken in a way, because it's a collaborating, right? And sometimes with that, I found a little bit struggling in a way, because I'm always a quiet one. It was like, well, but like I got to speak up, but when, how, what? And that is the thing that I think that kind of impacts a little bit in a way. And as like as I grow older and just try to learn, like, bit by bit, and I realized that it's okay to share your ideas and your feelings, and it will be okay, rather than like just shut up, and that's pretty much it. But then I feel like lucky enough that so far, like, people do, they no problem of listening, and collaborating, and I think that's good. And I really hope the industry will head to a way that, at the right direction.
So it seems like,
yeah.
Transitioning into the next question, it seems like, I mean, Sam talked about this a little, each of you kind of talked about this in your own way, where maybe Ting Ting was feeling like she couldn't speak her voice 100%. And Matthew was also feeling like he couldn't speak his voice. And Sam was also feeling like they couldn't speak their true, authentic voices. So I'm wondering, so this question is, what barriers have you faced in your industry because of being queer and or Asian? So obviously it's talking about both of the aspects or one of the other. So I'm wondering if there are any times that you've had, specifically like being queer and Asian being an issue within your industry. If you have, I mean, maybe you haven't. But I mean, I know I've had my own, I don't think I've had any spaces where it's been an issue to be queer and Black that I've experienced so far. I mean, it also helps that I like my identity that I feel connected to is my pronoun of he, him, his, right? And I think that maybe if I felt, I mean, sometimes I do feel more feminine and like, that's cool. But if I didn't feel comfortable on stage, being able to switch into that space, I could totally see how I would already have one possible knack against me because I'm Black, right? That's already one thing that certain people are like, are you sure you can play like a love interest to that white person on stage, right? And then also sometimes like I give I'm like, hey girl, what's up? What's the tea? But I'm able to switch into a more masculine space mentally when I need to. But if I were if I were not able to do that, if I felt consistently that my expression needed to be one way, you know, pretty much evenly, I think that it would be a big issue. I think that if I were to express myself the way that I do when I'm not on stage, it would be like the directors would be like, what is he doing? Like, why are you moving that way? Why are you being so flamboyant? Why aren't you, you know, man up? Like, why are you not, you know, all of those different things that come into that space. So I'm wondering if any of you have felt like that, whether it be like with directors or, you know, music staff or just in general. Anybody? I'm like Bueller.
Yeah, no. Wait, Sam, were you going to say something?
No, that's fine.
Oh, I think the only time I've faced a barrier from both was actually when I was like early on in the industry, working backstage, and it was sort of like a Me Too movement. Like there was somebody who was really into gay Asians. And I was the only Asian around, and it was just like constant harassment. And I didn't know what to do. And it was like, and I just kind of, and I was trying to do a job. So, and they were a singer, and it was just like not, it was really not fun. And then I did experience it later as a director with a board member who was just like really into gay Asians. And it was like, please, sir, you're going to have to back away.
It seems like that's a very,
do not touch me. Like,
yeah, that seems from what I've heard from a few of my friends, that seems like it's a common issue that a lot of my gay Asian or non-binary Asian friends have had to deal with.
From
this, like,
older men. It's an interesting thing, because then it's like, oh, when I'm like, at the time when I was like, I'm marketable, it's like crickets, you know, and then suddenly it's like, oh, it's like this old lecherous man, and I'm like, I don't understand, please stop. That would be like the only barrier within like the industry. But then I will say that there's been like a more broader barrier of what am I being asked to direct? Am I getting rehired? And what I have found that actually once people get to know me, like then they're like, okay, Ozawa, great. But what I've always found is that the reviewers, the critics of my work, that has been really surprising, because the reviewers actually have a way of completely erasing me from my shows.
Wow.
And I have been like consistently shocked by this. And I'm like, is it because I'm Asian? Is it because I look too young? Right? Like singers always, that's been an age thing, has also been an issue where I'm like, I'm actually a lot older than you'd think. Yeah. But they're like, you look like you're two, right? Because you're Asian. You look young because you're Asian. So you must not know what you're doing. And it's like constantly that battle. But then once I like started to get more respect, then it was the critics, where like, you know, a director who we're the same age, and like that director would get, you know, a Caucasian director would get like their name and all this info about them. And then for myself, the best example was I directed at I shouldn't say what company. I directed at a company. There was another director, you know, it was in rep. So we both were directing simultaneously. My review came out, and they used the other director's name as the director, this Caucasian director. And they said glowing things. And I was like, whoa, that is not their show. And so then we contacted the news source. They changed the review. And then they took out all of the glowing info that they said about this director. They just stuck my name in there. Wow. And it was like, that's when I knew. I was like, whoa, like that feels like a barrier. And then I had to go through a big period of just like ignoring critics altogether, because I was like, they're not an indicator of my worth or my artistry. But that was like a weird barrier in the industry that I didn't think I wasn't ready for it when it happened, you know, and it still oddly happens. A sort of what I call the erasure. It's like you create all this stuff and they're like, oh, we're going to credit someone else for it, whether it be a different director, or they're going to credit like oh, the singers just happen to all be so incredible at this one thing. And you're like, well, no, but that's because I helped direct it. You know, it's like the erasure, or, you know, the conductor erasure, or like there's so many erasures that you're like, that to me, that's been my thing.
No, that's kind of fascinating, because I feel like, too, on my end as a singer, we tend to be very self-focused. And so when you hear like these kind of stories, it also makes you think like, damn, like it's not even just the singer that is experiencing this. It's the director. It's the people that we feel like have like the power, you know? And like then you hear about their stories too, and conductors, and you know, it's just so interesting to get that perspective, because it's something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about in that way. And we should be thinking about things wholly, things, the full picture, right? So wow, that's interesting. What about you, Sam? I know that you kind of were in music for a long time, and then you kind of switched out. What about like in the industry that you're in now, or vice versa?
Yeah, you know, right after I stopped singing, I tried to get into arts administration and dip into a little bit of dramaturgy as well, because I really wanted to stay connected to training singers. I really felt like I had learned a lot from Vincent, from Fenland, and from other coaches and teachers, and thought I had something to offer. But then I was working with, you know, other arts nonprofits and summer training programs, and trying to get into the work, and I just kept facing this like weird racial tension in spaces that I would enter. I remember I was in an elevator, and she was very powerful and well-known arts administrator and singer said to me, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Syracuse, New York." And she was like, "No, like really, like where did you come from?" And I was like, "Okay, sure, whatever." I said, "No, I'm from the United States," and left the elevator. And as I think what people forget is to be able to become a board officer for a major nonprofit at 22. When I first did that, I had to like really push the system a lot just to be seen. People thought that, you know, because I was openly queer, because I was working in activism in areas, I was automatically going to be a problem person. And I think that also, in addition to like all the tension around there, because I intentionally chose to work with organizations that had a lot of queer staff, but I didn't really think about how the color of my skin was going to play into that. But going back also to this attempt to try to continue to stay in the arts, I remember I told someone, you know, what would you think of me trying to get into dramaturgy, working with singers? Because I taught history when I was in working in education, so I'm a big history and culture guy. And they said to me, "Well, Sam, are you going to be able to keep a Eurocentric lens on the work?" And I was like, and this person was a very well-known director. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And they told me like, "Well, you're very outspoken on queer issues, and I've read your academic work, and like you are always trying to look towards other cultures, and you know the field is European, white European is what people want." And I was like, "Okay, so I'm not gonna be doing this, I guess." And I'm gonna be honest, if a director came to me and said, "Hey Sam, I want to teach you dramaturgy and help you get back into the field," I would do it in 2 seconds, because but I stepped into higher education because I was like, look, if I can't work with them, or if I can't work with singers artistically, I want to work with them to reframe the higher education landscape to make it more viable for singers to succeed. And even there, I've met some tensions working in higher education, not even considering the artistic side of the education, but just higher education itself, where it's rare to find people who are queer and Asian, and that's been a barrier. But I also am still having trouble moving past, like, I feel like I lost a huge part of myself walking away from opera. And I tried to reclaim it, but I didn't find the way to get back to it, you know? So.
Well, I'm hoping that you are able to find that, because I think that you would be absolutely fabulous doing that work too, in addition to, well, all the other work that you do. I think that you should take the steps to make that happen. I think that's going to be extremely valuable to have your specific lens, your unique lens, lent to so many projects that need what you have to offer. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
I think you got some space to go into it. What about you, Ting Ting? Anything?
I'm trying to think, and now Sam is getting me a little bit depressed.
Oh.
Like the fact that, and no, it's not like that bad, but I feel like it's just really, it's a shame for people who are so talented and being so devoted and get discouraged in that way. And I think as an artist, all of us should really be supportive to everyone, so then we will be able to have a safe platform and be able to share, arts. But thinking of my experience, I think back, there are few moments that I always feel like sometimes you just have like kind of competitive platform. And I just feel like, because when the resume that my name is just look, Ting Ting Wong, right? Asian. And then compared to another white person name, it's just okay. Even though we have the same thing, there's just subconsciously think that, okay, toss, like that kind of thing. But it's something that like I realized that after a long while that there's no way I can control that. So again, it's like we have to control what we could, right? So again, back to the same, like square not one, like we have to own what we are and just accept. And that, and honestly, the accepting step is not as easy as everyone could, imagine, I think. Yeah.
Do you feel like it also has sometimes the reverse effect of like, because there's this bad, I think it's a bad perception, and that because you're Asian, you're a super hard worker, right? Like there's this like thing of, I've talked to a couple of friends about this, where it's like, because you're Asian, you're expected to be like great at a certain thing, whatever the thing is that you're doing. Do you feel like you've experienced any of that as well on the reverse side?
I think not that way, but now actually I think of there sometimes people, because me looking younger than what I am, and think people are just like, do you actually know that? Like, have you done that? Let me show you this. And it's like, yes, I've done it. I will be okay. Like, don't be worried. Like, and I think that's afterwards, I just feel like I'm not being a sensitive person. And afterwards, I was like, oh, what just happened there? And I think that maybe that's actually one of the barriers that I experienced then.
That's interesting. So it's not even necessarily like the things that you're most upfront with, but it's the perception of other people.
Or like you're young and you're not from here. Like, so then I'm just assuming you don't know this, but no, I have been here for a while. So maybe, just let me do it first and then we'll figure it out, right? Anyways.
But those stereotypes are so ingrained in people.
It is.
Right? Like either through, just their own, like through the history of the exclusion of Asians in the country, or through like media, the way that they view Asians in media, that they like assume that
Helen made a comment, so I wanted to highlight that.
So you're bad with things.
Yeah.
Yep.
These crazy assumptions. And it's really, I have always found that people are like, oh, you must be really servile and submissive. And you must be like, and in fact, actually, I did have an incident I've totally forgot about this. Elliot, you're going to get a kick. So we worked together at Santa Fe Opera, and I was making my directorial debut. And I remember on opening night, we went to this like the opening night party with the donors, and I was there with my assistant who was Caucasian, and we went to meet donors, the two of us, and they instantly were like, went to her and they were like, oh, you're the director, beautiful job, blah, 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 blah. And they turned to me and they were like, oh, so great costumes. And I was like, I'm not the design. I'm not the costume designer. I'm the director. And it was so awkward. And it happened over and over again that night that I was like, geez, I mean, people just can't assume that we have leadership positions, or they can't assume that we were in charge of this, because they assume that we're like quiet and we would just be, you know, doing something else, or we're too young. We look too young to be able to do that. The stereotypes, bad.
Yeah, that is I feel like that's actually the space where you experience it the most, is like it's the thing. It's like the parties after, or like the interactions after a show. And it's like, no, well, that wasn't me. That was my colleague over there. Or, just all these things where people don't take the time to actually be smart. You know what I mean? Or be cognizant of like what's happening around them. I'm so glad that you shared that, because I definitely will have to have a cheat sheet.
Yes, totally.
But I wanna circle back to something. What can we do looking forward? This is Sam's question. So I'm wondering, Sam, I'm going to put it up on the screen. So in what ways do colleges, universities, and conservatories need to shift their practices in training classical performing artists to be more inclusive and equitable? I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit and expound on your question.
Sure. For me, where this is coming from is the lack of an ethic of care in training artists. And I think it also goes back to something that I think everyone's brought up here, is like, we've been forced to assimilate into a white European training model, where when I was at, conservatory especially, it just seemed like everyone needed to be a perfect robot. You will practice for a ridiculous amount of hours a day. You will come to rehearsal, you will be immediately able to do it, and your emotions to the situation are irrelevant. And I just don't think that that's a healthy way of teaching any human being in the world. And my professor at Salem State, he specializes in training practitioners to teach and work with an ethic of care. So this is where this really comes from. And I just remember back the year that I made the decision to move out of music was because I was essentially forced out of my program. The year that I did, I had a lot of emotional crises based around both my identity and family situations. Like, we had lost our home. I was struggling with harassment. I didn't have enough food to eat. I couldn't do my laundry. This was just a crisis. And yes, there are students who face this outside of music and arts, but especially when you have to deal with the pressures of being a perfect performer as an artist, we forget that our art form, I think, unlike other academic areas, is a part of our spiritual and emotional self. And it's so personally deep. And I had at the program I was at, I had a meeting with the dean, because they said, you either have to drop out of all of your classes or you have to fail all of them. And because of the way that the music program was structured, if I did either one, my GPA would be too low to stay. And if I did the one where I dropped all my classes, I would be too just behind to come back and return. So I had proposed, okay, let me keep the classes that I was passing and let me, get rid of the ones that I was failing. And because of it was past the drop dead line, and which, by the way, is like in higher education, there's no real logic to a drop add deadline, right? Like it's just an obscure date that they pick. And I brought a letter from the head director of counseling at the university, which clearly explained my emotional state. I was in crisis. I needed help and support. I brought it to the dean, who is a professional musician, an artist, an administrator, very well-known person. And I had a one-on-one meeting with her, and she handed the letter back to me without even opening it. She said, I do not care what is in this letter. You will either fail or you will either drop out of everything, and you will not return. Now, this is a person who is still working in the industry, who is still a reputable artist and administrator. So I'm not going to say who it is out of fear, but it happens. It happened to me. I'm trying to get universities to see, why do we have obscure deadlines to things? Why are we so unwilling to work with students and be individual caretakers of their lives, especially when we're working in a field such as the arts that is so personal to the person and their well-being? So that's where this is coming from. I think for me, it comes from an ethic of care. Like, I had a director pick up a music stand and chuck it into the crowd of students because we weren't, performing up to the standard. And this was in an academic setting. And, so I've seen all types of stuff. And I think, when are we going to stand up as an industry where we're here to create space and an emotionally safe place for our students, especially the students of color and who are queer and who hold other marginalized identities? Because for most of us, we come to the table with a lot of trauma already before we even start our training. And we're forced to say, no, you have to fit in this robotic mold. And unless you can be perfect, you cannot make it.
This question is amazing. And I'm so happy that you expounded on the question, because I was thinking I was putting my own thoughts into a box. Like, I wasn't even thinking about the ethics of care space. I was just thinking like inclusivity and equity. And I think that we tend to forget that also means in a space of mental health and wellness. And you just like enlighten my brain by saying that little piece, because I'm with you 100%. Like, I know what it feels like to have things happening and you can't even express them because people will be like, I don't care.
And it wasn't until I met Dr. Kanagala at Salem State who showed me how much I had been socialized to just erase my emotional feeling, to just make other cisgender white people happy. And sort of what you all talked about finding your voice to speak up. It's been studying with him at Salem State that I've been able to find the voice to speak up for others. So.
That's amazing. Matthew, I feel like you want to say something. No? Are you processing?
I don't know how much tea I could spill about my university experience, but I mean, look, Sam, that is so like, the question's great, and the articulation of an ethics of care is so beautiful, because it is exactly what you're saying. It's so important, and especially for students who are like looking for mentorship or looking for like at least support with what they're going through. And I always feel like with students, it's very impressionable. Like, you as a teacher and a professor and anyone who's working with students, you have to be so careful, because everything you do has an impact. I mean, it does in life, but it's like in particular with students. And, I have always at least tried within my courses that I taught at the University of Michigan to like really make sure that every single student was valued, right? That every student had an ability to like talk and to have the space, or not to, if they didn't want to share something, or, in our rehearsal setting, we would have, an ability for people to like literally leave the space. If they were triggered by something that we were, talking about or interacting with, they could like leave, bail on the space, have a breather, come back in. And, like, I always had check-ins at the beginning, check-ins at the end, to like make sure that the students are doing well. I mean, as a opera is so boxy, right? Opera, exactly like what you've been talking about, is like, it's like, if you're a bass baritone, you must be masculine, and you must do these things, and you must do this kind of rap. And it was illuminating, because last year I had a Black trans singer whose voice was bass baritone, but did not at all connect with any of those roles. And so we actually, it was illuminating for both of us, because I feel like there was huge breakthroughs that were made about me trying to see what was outside that box that could give this trans singer the ability to like be an opera singer, but not follow the mold that the rest of the industry is trying to like box everyone in. And I feel like with, was it Lucia Lucas or where I feel like there are trans singers that are starting to like break it apart. But, you know, this particular trans singer really didn't like no masculine roles. And then it was like, well, it was very interesting of how do you, you know, how do you as a teacher really create an environment that feels inclusive and equitable, but also safe. Like safety is so important. And if you as a student do not feel safe with the people that are above you, if you don't feel safe with your teachers, if you don't feel safe with the administration, if you don't feel safe with the dean of your school or the chair of the department, like that's not something that any student should have to be in. And actually, I was just talking to some students about this last week, where they are feeling that they are getting racism from one of their professors who's like overseeing their academic advising. I also am like, you're paying so much money for this. Right? Like, you're not paying to get abused. You're not paying to like to experience this. So like, I think that what's so tricky is giving students the power to be able to like speak up to like what is in their best interest, because sometimes what the professor thinks is in their best interest is really not. Okay.
No, that's totally, I mean, yeah, I've had those experiences, especially in my undergrad. The director of music was a very interesting man. And there were, looking back now, you know, because that was what, 2009 to 2013. And so like, I was still trying to figure out like what is happening in the world. And now looking back, I'm like, oh my Lord, there are so many things that were not appropriate. And now I'm like, how do I, as a person who's in the arts, kind of like the same thing that you were saying, Sam, how do I now, going forward, make sure that those things don't happen in my presence, right? Like making myself have to have a voice and speak on things that I see when I feel like it's wrong. And that I wish that someone would have done for us as students then, to have another voice that felt like it was behind us and seeing the issues. I feel like it's a lot of like people in higher positions, just either they don't see the issues or they're just like, oh, well, they have tenure, so that's just how they are, you know. It's very toxic sometimes. Very toxic.
And the other challenging part to that too is like, especially as singers, the summer programs and the young artist programs are such a crucial part of our development. And I knew voice teachers were saying, oh, come do this program, you know, go see this teacher here. But how are we ensuring that the partners that we're handing our students off to are also creating the same safety for those students? Because a lot of the issues I faced happened at summer programs. They happened in other places that weren't necessarily at the university. But we have no choice but to trust them, because it's become such a part of how you build a career. And that's part of what I'm trying to do. Like, if I'm going to work in an administrative higher education space, how can we redesign training programs to build collaborative partnerships with institutions and organizations that we know will support diverse students?
That's great. That's totally the work that we need to keep happening. I'm so thankful for that. What about Ting Ting? Do you want to talk on this a little bit? Do you have any input?
I don't have much to say about it, but like after like absorbing all three of you saying, it's never too much to reach out when you see something is wrong, when you see something is not appropriate, because again, like as you look back, it's like, oh, if I would appreciate if that person could have done something for me. So if we just have to reach out, it's never too small of a gesture.
I love that. Yeah. So like even when you see something happening like that maybe not isn't affecting you specifically, but you see that someone
Right.
is suffering, like even reaching out to them or reaching out to someone,
Right.
keep raising your voice to say like, what's going on here? Is everything okay? Because
Right.
I can only imagine how many people in this world have missed out on opportunities because of the things that we're talking about that we've experienced, right? And I think going forward, something that we all have to take into account and have to take very seriously is speaking up and empowering ourselves to speak up and taking space, right? Well, also, I want to highlight this comment because it's so true. So lucky to have you all. But I think that it's so important for us to keep saying, no, this is not okay. No, and to talk about our experiences. I thank you all so much for being so open and for really talking about like what you've experienced in your lives, because so much of it people feel either ashamed because of something happened, or they feel like they wouldn't be taken seriously for talking about their experiences, or any of those different things, or and I totally want to thank you for talking about this, because what we're talking about right now is something that we experience daily, right? These are things that we experience maybe not every day, but we experience these things in our lives that are not the pretty rainbow things that we try to show everybody all the time, right? We're digging into some of that, and I just want to thank you. I mean, this conversation could obviously go on and on because we have there's many layers to unpack, but I'm going to start wrapping up, but I want to thank you first for being here. And then also, I want to know if there's any last minute tea that you'd like to spill, anything you'd like to talk about or discuss, or, maybe shout out your upcoming projects, or tell us, just whatever you want to say, your last little sip of tea. And I'll say Ting Ting first.
I was going to go anyways. I'm really glad to be able to discuss with all of you today. And I really think it's just, I feel like sometimes being Asian, it's just like a small group of community get overseas. And I think it's great to be able to share with people. And the fact that, like we're all in arts, and, respect is one thing and reach out is one thing. And we just really have to continue our work, or else it will not go anywhere. And, like we have our responsibility to keep on going. And it's not fighting, but like we will keep on like going to the right direction, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It is a fight though. I think fighting is it's breaking down walls. You're fighting with the barriers. So stay in the fight.
That's right.
Would anybody else like to go next? Go, Matthew.
I was gonna be like, yes, the fight, because I feel like we also need each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to band together, and I think that hearing the stories today are so beautiful, because I feel like this is the first time that I'm meeting Ting Ting and Sam, and I'm like, I hope this is only the beginning, of like friendships and relationships and like getting to know each other. Because I feel like there's so much, about unity and power in numbers and activating change. It's like, we're all doing it in our own little worlds, but it's so great to say, oh my gosh, like Sam, I want to reach out and learn more about everything that you're doing at the university. And like, there's just so much intersection of identity, but then there's also like intersection of people that if we've only been in like white spaces, well, now, like, as our networks are growing, this is the time to like, be like, okay, I've got to like hold everybody and say, okay, like, how can I help you? And how, what are the ways that we can all work together in our different areas in support of one another? So this has been great. and I am Sam Ting Ting. We like to share info. Okay. And Elliot, of course, we need to like be having some like.
Sam, yes.
Yeah, just my final words. To echo Matthew, it's been such a pleasure meeting and connecting with all of you. I do hope this continues on into the future. I think I don't really have anything to share about upcoming work with myself, but just to leave us like centering on something Elliot had said, that like our words and actions, and Matthew had mentioned this as well, like really have an impact on students' lives. I walked away from singing, in 2017. So it's been 3 years. And even to this day, I'm still talking about vividly the experiences and interactions I had with artists and educators, and really being intentional about when you do coach a young artist or you work with a student, how are you ensuring that 3 years from now, it's going to be a positive memory, right? And that makes all the difference, especially for our Asian and queer students and youth. So thank you.
Totally. So I'm gonna wrap up the show. I want to say thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you chatting with me and hearing your stories and expressing yourself so beautifully, and just giving us a little bit of insight into your lives. I'm so grateful. So you all hang out backstage. I'm gonna give a little wrap up, and then we'll chat a bit. Okay, let me doop doop doop. All right, so I want to thank our guests again for coming on today. It was such an amazing conversation and a very enlightening conversation. I hope that our guests who are watching will go out and share this video, because I think it's something that a space that we need to speak about more often and talk about our experiences and see how our experiences are so similar. We have so many more similarities than differences. And I just want to remind everyone that this was in conjunction with Wear Yellow Proudly. Please go check them out on Facebook and Instagram at Wear Yellow Proudly. And again, thank you for joining us for our National Coming Out Day episode. I'm going to show you my little rainbow, my rainbow pattern here. But I just want to thank you all for joining. Make sure that you, this is some good hot tea, honey, okay? We now have a podcast. So What's the Tea with ACP has a podcast. It's streaming on all platforms. And basically, it's little sips of tea instead of the whole cup. So it's about 20 to 30 minute episodes. You can catch up on whatever the topic was at hand, and you can get it on all streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts. Please join us 2 Sundays from now on October 24th, where we will have another episode of What's the Tea with ACP. Enjoy.
Here's the tea.